Mohammed, Yasser, Abdel, Rahman, Abdel, Raouf, Arafat, al-Qudwa, popularly known as Yasser Arafat or by his kunya Abu Ammar, was a Palestinian leader. He was chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, president of the Palestinian National Authority, and leader of the Fatah political party and former paramilitary group, which he founded in 1959. Originally opposed to Israel's existence, he modified his position in 1988 when he accepted UN Security Council Resolution 242. Arafat and his movement operated from several Arab countries. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Fatah faced off with Jordan in a brief civil war. Forced out of Jordan and into Lebanon, Arafat and Fatah were major targets of Israel's 1978 and 1982 invasions of that country. Later in his career, Arafat engaged in a series of negotiations with the government of Israel to end the decades-long conflict between it and the PLO. These included the Madrid Conference of 1991, the 1993 Oslo Accords and the 2000 Camp David Summit. His political rivals, including Islamists and several PLO leftists, often denounced him for being corrupt or too submissive in his concessions to the Israeli government. In 1994, Arafat received the Nobel Peace Prize, together with Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, for the negotiations at Oslo. During this time, Hamas and other militant organizations rose to power and shook the foundations of the authority that Fatah under Arafat had established in the Palestinian territories. In late 2004, after effectively being confined within his Ramallah compound for over 2 years by the Israeli army, Arafat became ill, fell into a coma and died on the 11th of November 2004 at the age of 75. While the cause of Arafat's death has remained the subject of speculation, investigations by Russian and French teams determined no foul play was involved. Arafat remains a controversial figure. The majority of the Palestinian people view him as a heroic freedom fighter and martyr who symbolized the national aspirations of his people, while most Israelis came to regard him as an unrepentant terrorist. Early life, birth and childhood. Arafat was born in Cairo, Egypt. His father, Abdel Raouf al-Qudwa al-Husseini, was a Palestinian from Gaza City, whose mother, Jaz's paternal grandmother, was Egyptian. Arafat's father battled in the Egyptian courts for 25 years to claim family land in Egypt as part of his inheritance but was unsuccessful. He worked as a textile merchant in Cairo's religiously mixed Sakakini district. Arafat was the second youngest of 7 children and was, along with his younger brother Fathi, the only offspring born in Cairo. His mother, Zawa Abul Saad, was from a Jerusalem-based family. She died from a kidney ailment in 1933, when Arafat was 4 years of age. Arafat's first visit to Jerusalem came when his father, unable to raise 7 children alone, sent him and his brother Fathi to the mother's family in the Moroccan quarter of the Old City. They lived there with their uncle Salim Abul Saad for 4 years. In 1937, the father recalled them to be taken care of by their older sister Hinam. Arafat had a deteriorating relationship with his father. When he died in 1952, Arafat did not attend the funeral, nor did he visit his father's grave upon his return to Gaza. Arafat's sister Hinam stated in an interview with Arafat's biographer, British historian Alan Hart, that Arafat was heavily beaten by his father for going to the Jewish quarter in Cairo and attending religious services. When she asked Arafat why he would not stop going, he responded by saying that he wanted to study Jewish mentality, education. In 1944, Arafat enrolled in the University of King Fahd I and graduated in 1950. At university, he engaged Jews in discussion and read publications by Theodor Herzl and other prominent Zionists. By 1946 he was an Arab nationalist and began procuring weapons to be smuggled into the former British Mandate of Palestine, for use by regulars in the Arab Higher Committee and the Army of the Holy War militias. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Arafat left the university and, along with other Arabs, sought to enter Palestine to join Arab forces fighting against Israeli troops and the creation of the State of Israel. However, instead of joining the ranks of the Palestinian Fatah, Arafat fought alongside the Muslim Brotherhood. Although he did not join the organization, he took part in combat in the Gaza area. In early 1949, the war was winding down in Israel's favor, and Arafat returned to Cairo from a lack of logistical support. After returning to the university, Arafat studied civil engineering and served as president of the General Union of Palestinian Students from 1952 to 1956. During his first year as president of the union, the university was renamed Cairo University after a coup was carried out by the Free Officers movement overthrowing King Farouk I. By that time, Arafat had graduated with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and was called to duty to fight with Egyptian forces during the Suez Crisis. However, he never actually fought. Later that year, at a conference in Prague, he donned a solid white kafiyeh different from the fishnet-patterned one he adopted later in Kuwait, which was to become his emblem. Marriage. In 1990, Arafat married Suha Tawil, a Palestinian Christian, when he was 61 and Suha 27. Before the marriage, she was working as a secretary for Arafat in Tunis after her mother introduced her to him in France. Prior to Arafat's marriage, he adopted 50 Palestinian war orphans. During her marriage, Suha tried to leave Arafat on many occasions, but was not permitted to by her husband. She views her marriage to Arafat as a mistake. Suha said she regrets the marriage and, given the choice again, would not have wed him. On the 24th of July 1995, Arafat's wife Suha gave birth to a daughter in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. She was named Zawa after Arafat's deceased mother. Arafat's full name was Mohammed Abdel Rahman Abdel Raouf Arafat al-Qudwa. Mohammed Abdel Rahman was his first name, Abdel Raouf was his father's name, and Arafat his grandfather's. Al-Qudwa was the name of his tribe, and al-Husseini was that of the clan to which the al-Qudwas belonged. The al-Husseini clan was based in Gaza and is not related to the well-known al-Husseini clan of Jerusalem. Since Arafat was raised in Cairo, the tradition of dropping the Muhammad or Ahmad portion of one's first name was common. Notable Egyptians such as Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak did so. However, Arafat also dropped Abdel Rahman and Abdel Raouf from his name as well. During the early 1950s, Arafat adopted the name Yasser, and in the early years of Arafat's guerrilla career, he assumed the nom de guerre of Abu Ammar. Both names are related to Ammar ibn Yasir, one of Muhammad's early companions. Although he dropped most of his inherited names, he retained Arafat due to its significance in Islam. Rise of Fatah. Founding of Fatah. Following the Suez Crisis in 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser agreed to allow the United Nations Emergency Force to establish itself in the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip, precipitating the expulsion of all guerrilla or Fatah forces there, including Arafat. Arafat originally attempted to obtain a visa to Canada and later Saudi Arabia, but was unsuccessful in both attempts. In 1957, he applied for a visa to Kuwait and was approved based on his work in civil engineering. He encountered two Palestinian friends, Salah Khalaf and Khalil al-Wazir, both official members of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. Arafat had met Abu Ammar while attending Cairo University and Abu Jihad in Gaza. Both would later become Arafat's top aides. Abu Ammar traveled with Arafat to Kuwait in late 1960. Abu Jihad, also working as a teacher, had already been living there since 1959. After settling in Kuwait, Abu Ammar helped Arafat obtain a temporary job as a schoolteacher. As Arafat began to develop friendships with Palestinian refugees, he and the others gradually founded the group that became known as Fatah. The exact date for the establishment of Fatah is unknown. In 1959, the group's existence was attested to in the pages of a Palestinian nationalist magazine, leader.He, which was written and edited by Abu Jihad. Fatah is a reverse acronym of the Arabic name Harakat al-Tahrir al-Watani al-Filistini, which translates into the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. Fatah is also a word that was used in early Islamic times to refer to conquest. Fatah dedicated itself to the liberation of Palestine by an armed struggle carried out by Palestinians themselves. This differed from other Palestinian political and guerrilla organizations, most of which firmly believed in a united Arab response. Arafat's organization never embraced the ideologies of the major Arab governments of the time, in contrast to other Palestinian factions, which often became satellites of nations such as Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and others. In accordance with his ideology, Arafat generally refused to accept donations to his organization from major Arab governments, in order to act independently of them. He did not want to alienate them, and sought their undivided support by avoiding ideological alliances. However, to establish the groundwork for Fatah's future financial support, he enlisted contributions from the many wealthy Palestinians working in Kuwait and other Arab states of the Persian Gulf, such as Qatar. These businessmen and oil workers contributed generously to the Fatah organization. Arafat continued this process in other Arab countries, such as Libya and Syria. In 1962, Arafat and his closest companions migrated to Syria, a country sharing a border with Israel, which had recently seceded from its union with Egypt. Fatah had approximately 300 members by this time, but none were fighters. In Syria, he managed to recruit members by offering them higher incomes to enable his armed attacks against Israel. Fatah's manpower was incremented further after Arafat decided to offer new recruits much higher salaries than members of the Palestine Liberation Army, the regular military force of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was created by the Arab League in 1964. On the 31st of December, a squad from al-Asifa, Fatah's armed wing, attempted to infiltrate Israel, but they were intercepted and detained by Lebanese security forces. Several other raids with Fatah's poorly trained and badly equipped fighters followed this incident. Some were successful, others failed in the missions. Arafat often led these incursions personally. Arafat was detained in Syria's Mezeh prison when a Palestinian Syrian army officer, Youssef Urabi, was killed. Urabi had been chairing a meeting to ease tensions between Arafat and Palestinian Liberation Front leader Ahmed Jibril, but neither Arafat nor Jibril attended, delegating representatives to attend on the behalf. Urabi was killed during or after the meeting amid disputed circumstances. On the orders of Defense Minister Hafez al-Assad, a close friend of Urabi, Arafat was subsequently arrested. found guilty by a three-man jury and sentenced to death. However, he and his colleagues were pardoned by President Saleh shortly after the verdict. The incident brought Assad and Arafat to unpleasant terms, which would surface later when Assad became president of Syria, leader of the Palestinians. On the 13th of November 1966, Israel launched a major raid against the Jordanian-administered West Bank town of as-Samu, in response to a Fatah-implemented roadside bomb attack which had killed 3 members of the Israeli security forces near the southern Green Line border. In the resulting skirmish, scores of Jordanian security forces were killed and 125 homes razed. This raid was one of several factors that led to the 1967 Six-Day War. The Six-Day War began when Israel launched airstrikes against Egypt's Air Force on the 5th of June 1967. The war ended in an Arab defeat and Israel's occupation of several Arab territories, including the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Although Nasser and his Arab allies had been defeated, Arafat and Fatah could claim a victory, in that the majority of Palestinians, who had up to the time tended to align and sympathize with individual Arab governments, now began to agree that a Palestinian solution to the dilemma was indispensable. Many primarily Palestinian political parties, including George Habash's Arab nationalist movement, Haj Amin al-Husseini's Arab Higher Committee, the Islamic Liberation Front and several Syrian-backed groups, virtually crumbled after the sponsor government's defeat. Barely a week after the defeat, Arafat crossed the Jordan River in disguise and entered the West Bank, where he set up recruitment centers in Hebron, the Jerusalem area and Nablus, and began attracting both fighters and financiers for his cause. At the same time, Nasser contacted Arafat through the former's advisor Mohammed, and Arafat was declared by Nasser to be the leader of the Palestinians. Quote, in December 1967, Ahmad Shukeri resigned his post as PLO chairman. Yahya Hamouda took his place and invited Arafat to join the organization. Fatah was allocated 33 of 105 seats of the PLO Executive Committee, while 57 seats were left for several other guerrilla factions. Battle of Connormah. Throughout 1968, Fatah and other Palestinian armed groups were the target of a major Israeli army operation in the Jordanian village of Connormah, where the Fatah headquarters, as well as a mid-sized Palestinian refugee camp, were located. The town's name is the Arabic word for dignity, which elevated its symbolism in the eyes of the Arab people, especially after the collective Arab defeat in 1967. The operation was in response to attacks, including rocket strikes from Fatah and other Palestinian militias within the Israeli-occupied West Bank. According to Said Abrish, the government of Jordan and a number of Fatah commandos informed Arafat that large-scale Israeli military preparations for an attack on the town were underway, prompting Fedayeen groups, such as George Habash's newly formed Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and Nayef Hawatma's breakaway organization, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, to withdraw the forces from the town. Though advised by a sympathetic Jordanian army divisional commander to withdraw his men and headquarters to the nearby hills, Arafat refused, stating, "We want to convince the world that there are those in the Arab world who will not withdraw or flee." Abrish writes that it was on Arafat's orders that Fatah remained, and that the Jordanian army agreed to back them if heavy fighting ensued. In response to persistent PLO raids against against Israeli civilian targets. Israel attacks the town of Connormah, Jordan, the site of a major PLO camp. The goal of the invasion was to destroy Connormah camp and capture Yasser Arafat in reprisal for the attacks by the PLO against Israeli civilians, which culminated in an Israeli school bus hitting a mine in the Negev. However, plans for the two operations were prepared in 1967, 1 year before the bus incident. When Jordan saw the sight of the raiding forces entering the battle, it was led to the assumption that Israel had another goal of capturing Balka Governorate to create a Golan Heights similar situation. Israel assumed that the Jordanian army would ignore the invasion, but the latter fought alongside the Palestinians and opened heavy fire that inflicted losses upon the Israeli forces. This engagement marked the first known deployment of suicide bombers by Palestinian forces. The Israelis were repelled at the end of a day's battle, having destroyed most of the Connormah camp and taken around 141 PLO prisoners. Both sides declared victory. On a tactical level, the battle went in Israel's favor and the destruction of the Connormah camp was achieved. However, the relatively high casualties were a considerable surprise for the Israel Defense Forces and was stunning to the Israelis. Although the Palestinians were not victorious on their own, King Hussein let the Palestinians take credit. Some have alleged that Arafat himself was on the battlefield, but the details of his involvement are unclear. However, his allies as well as Israeli intelligence confirm that he urged his men throughout the battle to hold the ground and continue fighting. The battle was covered in detail by Time, and Arafat's face appeared on the cover of the 13th of December 1968 issue, bringing his image to the world for the first time. Amid the post-war environment, the profiles of Arafat and Fatah were raised by this important turning point, and he came to be regarded as a national hero who dared to confront Israel. With mass applause from the Arab world, financial donations increased significantly, and Fatah's weaponry and equipment improved. The group's numbers swelled as many young Arabs, including thousands of non-Palestinians, joined the ranks of Fatah. When the Palestinian National Council convened in Cairo on 3 February 1969, Yasser Arafat stepped down from his chairmanship of the PLO. Arafat was elected chairman on 4 February. He became commander-in-chief of the Palestinian Revolutionary Forces 2 years later, and in 1973, became the head of the PLO's political department. Confrontation with Jordan. In the late 1960s, tensions between Palestinians and the Jordanian government increased greatly. Heavily armed Palestinian elements had created a virtual state within a state in Jordan, eventually controlling several strategic positions in the country. After the proclaimed victory in the Battle of Connormah, Fatah and other Palestinian militias began taking control of civil life in Jordan. They set up roadblocks, publicly humiliated Jordanian police forces, molested women, and levied illegal taxes, all of which Arafat either condoned or ignored. King Hussein considered this a growing threat to his kingdom's sovereignty and security, and attempted to disarm the militias. However, in order to avoid a military confrontation with opposition forces, Hussein dismissed several of his anti-PLO cabinet officials, including some of his own family members, and invited Arafat to become Prime Minister of Jordan. Arafat refused, citing his belief in the need for a Palestinian state with Palestinian leadership. Despite Hussein's intervention, militant actions in Jordan continued. On 15 September 1970, the PFLP hijacked 5 planes and landed 3 of them at Dawson's Field, located 30 miles east of Amman. After the passengers were moved to other locations, 3 of the planes were blown up. This tarnished Arafat's image in many Western nations, including the United States, who held him responsible for controlling Palestinian factions that belonged to the PLO. Arafat, bowing to pressure from Arab governments, publicly condemned the hijackings and suspended the PFLP from any guerrilla actions for a few weeks. He had taken the same action after the PFLP attacked Athens airport. The Jordanian government moved to regain control over its territory, and the next day, King Hussein declared martial law. On the same day, Arafat became supreme commander of the PLA. As the conflict raged, other Arab governments attempted to negotiate a peaceful resolution. As part of this effort, Gamal Abdel Nasser led the first emergency Arab League summit in Cairo on the 21st of September. Arafat's speech drew sympathy from attending Arab leaders. Other heads of state took sides against Hussein, among them Muammar Gaddafi, who mocked him and his schizophrenic father King Talal. A ceasefire was agreed upon between the two sides, but Nasser died of a massive heart attack hours after the summit, and the conflict resumed shortly afterward. By the 25th of September, the Jordanian army achieved dominance, and 2 days later Arafat and Hussein agreed to a ceasefire in Amman. The Jordanian army inflicted heavy casualties on the Palestinians, including civilians, who suffered approximately 3,500 fatalities. After repeated violations of the ceasefire from both the PLO and the Jordanian army, Arafat called for King Hussein to be toppled. Responding to the threat, in June 1971, Hussein ordered his forces to oust all remaining Palestinian fighters in northern Jordan, which they accomplished. Arafat and a number of his forces, including 2 high-ranking commanders, Abu Ayyad and Abu Jihad, were forced into the northern corner of Jordan. They relocated near the town of Jerash, near the border with Syria. With the help of Munib Masri, a pro-Palestinian Jordanian cabinet member, and Fard al-Homaimi, the Saudi ambassador to Jordan, Arafat managed to enter Syria with nearly 2,000 of his fighters. However, due to the hostility of relations between Arafat and Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, the Palestinian fighters crossed the border into Lebanon to join PLO forces in that country, where they set up the new headquarters.